straight into this, I wanted to cover today how to present an offer the seller wants to accept, okay? So what this is really about is a little bit about, well, you guys missed it this morning. Mike talked about managing risk. And risk is the thing that ultimately we are in the business of trying to manage for our clients, okay? So that all comes down and it all gets drilled. Managing risk just drilled down, and where it really comes to a pinpoint is when you are sitting down and writing the offer for your client. And this is where trying to present an offer that the seller wants to accept really comes into play. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to launch straight into it. And yeah, I hear you, Letitia. My phone is ringing off the hook now.
I know, right? It's so funny.
Okay, y'all looking at my slideshow right now?
Yes.
How to accept an offer. So what this really all comes down to, let me get my presentation slides working, is what is our role in this equation? As a buyer's agent, when we are writing an offer, we want to do two things. And those two things are often inversely proportionate to one another. So one, you want to get the best possible deal for your client. Okay, so imagine if this is the transaction and the scales of balance of justice here are a good analogy. If you get your client the best possible deal, say you write them an offer that's $30,000 under asking price, when everything in this marketplace is selling it for 102% of the asking price, and you draft an offer that's less, did you get a great deal for your client? Yeah, you probably did. But did that offer have much of a chance of getting accepted in this marketplace? Nope, not realistically. Not when in the marketplace everything else can fetch 102% of the market value, and you're putting an offer in that's 90% of the market value. No. So in that case, the risk is really not in balance here. Okay. So we have to basically manage those risks and try to create that balance. All right. So a couple of things and the techniques that we're going to talk about in here have some risk associated with them, and we have to kind of manage that risk and make sure that our clients are advised of the risks that they might be taking. So one of the things that I strongly recommend is, as you're presenting offers, is that you make sure that they understand what those risks are. And there's a way to do that through a disclosure. And it's a disclosure to buyers purchasing property in a seller's market. We are in the strongest seller's market that we have been in a very long time. And it's probably going to be this way for a good year longer too, to be perfectly honest with you, based off of the current projections. So we see buyers taking huge risks, buying homes as is, or waiving for things like inspections and due diligence periods and appraisals. All of those things have risks associated with them, and our clients need to be well advised of them. All right. So if you have problems we should be having those conversations. And two, if you're not comfortable having those conversations, there's documents that you can have your client sign that will basically help manage that risk for you. And this is them. So this is a disclosure to buyers purchasing property in a seller's market. I typically have clients sign this disclosure when they're doing the buyer's brokerage agreement. And this is a document that's found in Remind Docs Plus. It's available. All you got to do is put it into your docs package when you're having them sign a BBA. Any questions on that, ladies?
No, got that.
Okay. So ways to make your offer more attractive to a seller. Okay. So who amongst us has bought a car lately?
Oh, not lately.
Well, all of us can probably remember and relate to a time when you did buy a car. And when you were buying a car, there were a lot of things that you were taking into consideration, I'm assuming, correct? You wanted the make, the model, the color, you wanted the sport wheel package, You wanted the racing stripes down the side, all of those things. Looking at me like I've got three heads. I understand. Work with me on the analogy, okay? There were a lot of things that you were considering, all right? It's the same thing for a seller. A lot of the agents think, oh, it all comes down to the price, the net price. What is the sales price and what are they going to net? That is one of about 24 factors that are on that very first page of the purchase and sale agreement. So you got to craft the purchase and sale agreement that the seller wants to accept, all right? So one of the first things that you want to do is figure out what it is that the seller wants so that you can know what to accept. So one of the prerequisites to everything that we're about to talk about is the first thing I do when I'm preparing an offer is I call the listing agent and I ask the listing agent, what is the seller looking for? And 9 times out of 10, they will, they'll tell you. And sometimes they shouldn't tell you, but they will. All right. So my
Hey,
typical.
can I ask a question about that real quick?
Bring it on.
You know, that's what I'm used to, calling listing agent and getting some information. However, I've been having a lot of challenge in this South market where agents don't pick up the phone.
Yeah.
I've had several occasions where I even emailed, and not until I send an offer that I have a response that offer is rejected or accepted or whatever. Like, what am I missing?
It's a crying shame, isn't it? You're not missing anything. Unfortunately, it's a reality of the business that we are in. Not every agent is going to be as diligent and as dutiful as you are. So my only advice is don't be that agent.
Right.
Answer your daggone phone. Pick up the phone. Communicate with people when they ask you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does take some consideration. If a cherry home hits the market and they're getting 20, 30 calls a day, I've been in that situation. Sometimes it's just a reality of the volume of calls that you're getting. It's hard to make that a reality, but always attempt to. You may not always be successful, okay?
So there's a listing on the market right now. It's still not showing pending. It has been on the market over 100 days, and
Okay.
this agent is not responding. We sent an offer. We have not had responses. So how do you handle that with your buyers? Because now it's like, did you present my offer? Why is it still on the market and we don't have an answer? Like, what do you say in those situations?
If you've never noticed on the MLS sheets, down at the bottom of the sheet where it has the broker's info or the agent and the broker's information, it has their brokerage phone number and then their cell phone number. If you don't get anywhere with the personal trying to reach them directly, you can reach out to their brokerage and say, hey, I've been trying to get in touch with agent X. I have not received a reply. I'm trying to find out some information about property X, Y, and Z. And generally speaking, when you go through the brokerage, you might have a better result. It could also be a situation where the property is still continuing to being marketed, even though it is on the MLS. They might have an agreement with a kick-out provision in it. So there might be something else involved in that, but it would be great if you could at least get an answer. So I'm in agreement with you.
I know. That's sad. She put an offer in and they're still ignoring her. Goodness gracious.
Well, so if you've actually put in an offer, there is one other thing that you can do. There is a GAR form. I need to look at this. I'm trying to remember. I think there's a GAR form where you can actually request evidence or I think you can actually ask for proof that it was presented to the client.
Okay.
That's kind of a Hail Mary throw, though.
Right.
Not sure strategically if that's going to get you very far. I think a phone call to the brokerage might be a little bit more advantageous to you, or might be a more effective means of doing that. Okay. So let's launch back in. So obviously, ways to make your offer more attractive. Again, remembering that the sales price is only one of the factors. So let's talk about some of the things that are the factors. obviously, the sales price is a big one because you want to bid the highest net to the seller. Okay, so either high on the sales price or low on the closing cost contribution from the seller, or some combination of both. All right. Ultimately, the net is going to be the most important thing to them. Another consideration that is going to help you to separate your offer from the rest of the pack is offer a much higher earnest money than the norm. Okay, and the norm or the standard or the whatever the common vernacular is for this day and age, 1% of the sales price is pretty much the minimum, or considered the minimum in most agents' line of business. If you want to present a strong offer, anything above 2.5%, 3%. In extreme situations, I am actually aware of a scenario. It's been quite a few years. Let me hit stop here, but I'm actually aware of a scenario of a home that was sold in Florida. It was like a $600,000 house, and the earnest money was $600,000.
Yeah, I on the Power Talk today, Mike was talking about, if your down payment is 20%, do that as your earnest money. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh Lord, if you lose it.
In a market, this was in a strong seller's market where this guy was willing to risk everything on the earnest money transaction. And they were like, well, wait a minute, this must be a typo. Surely you meant $200,000 or what, some other version of that, and you're missing a digit here. No. And the transaction closed for what it's worth. Okay. Additional considerations, either a short or no due diligence period. No due diligence period is risky, and we're going to talk about that and ways to manage that risk in just a minute too. All right. Any questions on anything so far?
No, so far so good.
Okay. You know what, folks? My slides just do not seem to want to work today. Here we go. Sorry about that, folks. All right. Shorter closing date, or oftentimes a short closing date is often perceived to be what a seller wants. That is often not the case. Sometimes they want a longer closing date. So sometimes it might be easier to just simply express some flexibility on the closing date in your email that you're sending over. And obviously, if you want to do a super short closing date, you got to make sure that the lender can actually deliver on that closing date if you are using a mortgage lender in this case. Okay. Let's talk about closing dates. What is the norm, or what is the standard pretty much practice time right in this market right now in terms of cycle time from closing? Usually 30 to 45 days, right?
Really? Really?
Yeah.
From the time you submitted the offer?
Finding to closing, 30 to 45 days on average. The problem is when people try to do it much shorter, you're pressing too many, you're trying to compress too much into too short a period of time. And everybody wants to try to close towards the end of the month, and usually on a Friday, and you're doing that all out of the convenience of your buyer, because they want to be able to close on Friday, move in over the weekend, get back to school on Monday, kind of a scenario.
Right.
I'm going to tell y'all, you're setting yourself up for a heartache of failure and disappointment, not only for yourself, but your clients. My strongest recommendation, try to arrange your closing dates not at the end of the month and not on a Friday. Make it on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a Monday, something along those lines.
Oh,
Because
no,
one,
not right now, but
go ahead.
oh, sorry.
That's all right. You might want to, in fact, if it's okay, I might mute you if it's okay. So one is you don't want to press the system, because lenders and closing attorneys, some closing attorneys can't even quote or can't even get you on the schedule at the end of the month. Luder Larkin was trying to get somebody scheduled yesterday for a closing before the end of this month. And it's like, there's no availability. It can't happen. So do your best to try to close not at the end of the month and not on a Friday, if at all possible. Just a little piece of advice. Okay. Shorter financing and appraisal contingencies can help you win in a bidding war. Shorter financing or shorter appraisal contingencies can very much help you. Obviously, you never want to do that without the lender's consent or approval. They may have already sent your package through underwriting, and that's something that I would definitely want to consider too. Okay. Now let's talk about the cleaner the offer, the better. If you are putting a whole bunch of special steps into your offer package, like, hey, that window in the front bay window needs to be replaced, and you're doing that in the purchase and sale agreement, it may be better to ask for those repairs not in the purchase and sale agreement, but after you're under contract and during the due diligence period through the amendment to address concerns. Okay. The message is if this person is going to ask for repairs this early in the game, you know, what might they ask for later during the due diligence period? Follow me? All right. Why is my slides just not advancing today? Here we go. Financing considerations. Which financing did the offer come from? What financing was it? And how do you prioritize them? So we're going to put these pretty much in order of preference. So cash is always going to be best. If you get a cash offer, it is going to be less risk and more advantageous to your seller client than a conventional loan. Likewise, a conventional is going to be more advantageous than an FHA or a VA or a USDA. All right, all three of those are pretty much on an even par. I think we've talked about this before, but why are VA and FHA less desirable than conventional?
They have more like requirements, right? As far as for the quality of the house.
They have more restrictions, they have more requirements, they have more bureaucratic processes that have to go through than conventional or cash. So that's why they're going to be viewed as less desirable by a seller. Okay, USDA is kind of in that same thing. USDA those are loans for more rural areas outside of Metro Atlanta. You're not going to see those in the Metro Atlanta category in counties, but if you were to do business out in Rockmart or Adairsville or way up in the mountains, that's where you're going to get USDA properties. Lastly, any loan with a down payment assistance program such as Georgia Dream, NACA, there are several others that are out there. Those are going to have a longer close date and they're going to be considered least desirable. All right. So if you've got a client that it has to have down payment assistance, it's going to be tough to compete in this market when it's such a strong seller's market and sellers do not have to accept offers with down payment type assistance programs. Okay.
Hey, quick question.
Yes,
On
sir.
average, like how much longer does those programs typically,
Yeah, so the way that those typically work, we just talked about the cycle time being 30 to 45
30, 45.
What you typically end up having to do is you go through the normal processing for the lender. Say you had Bank of America or I don't know, Wells Fargo or one of those people processing. They would go through their entire process, get clear to close, process the loan, finish everything, then send it over to Georgia Dream, and Georgia Dream might take 2 weeks to do it after that. So instead of 30 days, you're talking about a 45-day cycle, or instead of a 45-day cycle, you're talking about a 60-day cycle.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So what that time frame is depends on which program the buyer qualified for. So work with your buyer and their lender to be able to figure out what that is.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Here's a great example of this goes back to a different market. If you guys like my little text, this was a different time when people were doing anything. But essentially is review your finance contingency, always ask for things like, a higher down payment implies that the buyer is more financially secure and less risk to the seller, so it's going to be more advantageous. So, watch for that. If you have two conventional loans, one that's paying an 80% down payment versus one that's paying a 50% down payment, which one of those two is going to be less risk to the seller?
80%.
No.
Oh, wait. Oh, 50% loan. Yeah.
50% down payment.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
You got it.
I was thinking they were putting 80 down. I'm sorry.
You got it. All right. Who here has ever used an escalation clause in an offer?
I have.
Yeah. Very, very helpful. How did it work out? Was it well received for you, Marie?
Actually, I think that's the only reason we won those offers. At the it was just ridiculous. So
Yep.
in one of those instances, though, it got a little dicey because the buyers were like, "Oh, we just want the house, like by any means necessary." But then when came time to sell that over appraisal value,
Yeah.
couple down payment, it was pretty rough, but we made it happen.
Absolutely. So she actually brought up a great point. So those of you that may not be familiar, the escalation clause, you can pretty much read it right here, but essentially what it says is it's kind of a hedge against a hedge against the risk. Is you want to bid over the next best guy, the next best offer, but you don't want to go too far over. So why go more than you have to? And that's essentially what an escalation clause does. And it says that the buyer agrees to pay above the next best offer by X amount of dollars. Usually it's $1,000 over the next best offer. And you do that up to a cap of whatever you feel is the maximum the buyer would want to do. All right. But the second bullet down here at the bottom was what Marie pointed out, is the biggest concern with an escalation clause is that when you're financing, the home still must appraise if you're using an appraisal contingency and you're using financing that has an appraisal contingency involved. All right. So you've got to manage that and try to make sure that you're not going over. All right. If you were to consider going over, there is the possibility of using a special stipulation for an appraisal gap coverage, which you can read here. And essentially what that says is you're going to be able to pay the difference up to a certain amount above what the appraised value is. Okay, so you're offering to cover some or all of that gap in the appraised value, which reduces the risk to the seller. Any questions on this? One thing very specific is you cannot use appraisal gap coverage, a special stipulation like this in FHA or VA loans, because they have that amendatory clause that basically says, doesn't matter what you write into this agreement, if you put in an appraisal gap coverage like this, it's meaningless because the amendatory clause overwrites it. Okay, and does everybody understand the amendatory clause? That's the one that says that the seller or the buyer cannot be penalized for an FHA or a VA loan if the appraisal comes in low by the forfeiture of their earnest money. All right.
Jay, that's really interesting because that's not how it works in a different state. Even though we had that a mandatory clause as well, we were still able to guarantee the gap outside of the FHA appraisal. So
Able to write it into the agreement, but is it truly enforceable based off of the contract language in the state of Georgia? It is not enforceable.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. It is not enforceable. If you want to, it's beyond the scope of what we can do today, but if you want to look up the amendatory clause, FHA amendatory clause, and it has that little language in it that says notwithstanding any other agreement anywhere or any other clause anywhere in this agreement, basically what that says is it doesn't matter what you write anywhere else, this special stip, you cannot overwrite that. And that's what the amendatory clause is in there for.
Well, that should be countrywide, right? If it's federal, right?
It should be, because that is a federal regulation.
Mhm.
All right. To be honest with you, it's not a well-known thing even in the state of Georgia, to be perfectly honest.
That's the thing, like, a lot of times with our contracts, our purchase contracts and mandatory clauses and other amendment is the enforcement basically is based on the knowledge of each parties involved in the transaction.
It's true.
Yeah. And a lot of
So-
people don't read.
Yeah, and you can be you can very effectively disarm your co-op agent by going, well, I see you send an FHA offer, but you got an appraisal gap coverage in here. You realize that's meaningless, right? And they're gonna go, really? Why? Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. There are a whole, speaking of special steps that you might want to use, there are a whole bunch of special steps in our clause library that you can appropriate and use. So we were just talking about the escalation clause. That's one of the ones that is in here. You have the appraisal below the price with an automatic price adjustment. These are all carefully written, very well rehearsed and legally binding special stipulations that you can use in the process of negotiating your offer. You can even do staged earnest money. Did anybody know? Has anybody ever known that? Like if your client wants to pay 3% but doesn't have the 3% now, you can do 1% now, 1% at the end of due diligence, and another percent with clear to close.
Yeah.
You can structure just about anything, y'all, to make it work for your clients. All right. Here is another technique. So instead of a due diligence period, you can actually use a property sold with the right to request repairs. All right. So instead of a due diligence period, remember a due diligence period is where you can cancel the contract for any reason at all or for no reason at all. If you submit an offer instead of with a due diligence period, but 0 days due diligence, but sell it with a right, property sold with a right to request repairs exhibit, it removes the no particular reason from the equation. So in other words, it says, we're going to buy your house and we will do it only if we have a lack of agreement on these factors, such as the structure of the house or the function and operation of the house. It doesn't mean I could change my mind next week during the due diligence period, and send you a contract or send you a termination. This means the only reason I could send you a termination is if we can't agree on the repairs to be done on that foundation or on that roof or whatever in the house. Everybody follow me?
Yeah, so, oh, wait, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. So, with this one, when you send this exhibit, you don't know, you haven't had it looked at yet, right?
That is correct. What you're telling them is you want to request repairs within a certain period of time.
Right.
And then further down in this document, it tells you how long they have to respond to it and everything that is on the slide.
Okay.
But
Okay.
they have a period of time where they have to respond to your repairs and you go through the process. But essentially is the same and it effectively works very similar to a due diligence period. You still submit an amendment to address concerns. It just takes I'm going to cancel the contract because I can during due diligence, even though I have no reason to do so.
Exactly. Gotcha.
It
Nice.
means that the reason has to be very, very specific and it's outlined in paragraph 2 of this document right here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
So are you saying that they do get their earnest money back if they cancel during the due diligence period, even without a valid reason to cancel?
Ask that one more time. Let me make sure I understand the question.
So I'm just, I've read your contracts, but I'm still like, what in the world is going on here? But because it's it's different, right?
Yes,
So are you saying that a buyer has the right to cancel a contract for no reason at all and have their earnest money returned if canceled during the due diligence period? Here,
yes, that is their right. Absolutely.
that's
Is that
different.
different where you're from?
Definitely. You're not canceling for any reason at all, and we don't need another amendment or document to say that you have the right to repair it, either as is, or you're not buying only because there are either mechanical, structural, or safety-related matter discovered in due diligence period. Outside of that, you're compensating the sellers with that earnest money plus some damages.
No. They can cancel for any reason at all or for no reason at all during the due diligence period. I could be under contract to buy a house and I could have a dream that that house is haunted by the ghost of my dead grandmother's cat.
Not the
I
cat.
could call up the listing agent and I could say, I'm canceling my contract because this house is haunted. And they would have no other choice but to say, okay, we'll return your earnest money. Click.
Wow.
Crazy.
Now, if they
So
do that
what-
one day after the due diligence period ends, no problem. We'll keep your earnest money. Thank you very much. Click.
Okay, what state are you coming from, ma'am?
Yeah, where are you coming from, Marie? I remember.
Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, the law's pretty much the same over there. It's, you're not getting out of contract for silly reasons. It's a
Mhm.
legal agreement. Be sure, and that's the first line of the contract. Be sure of what you're doing. There's no playing over here.
No plan. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so property sold with the right to request repairs is another great one. I've got about 3 other points on here, but we are over time. So if you all are interested, we can pick up or we can do it in our next session or one of your coaching sessions coming up. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah,
You're welcome, folks. Have a great day. Talk to you very soon.
this was
Bye.
good.